Hi there, I'm out in my garden right now, using it as an opportunity to talk about our upcoming week, looking at the parts of an experiment. That's really important for us as we study the science of living things for the rest of the year, to understand the parts of an experiment and why they're so important. So I'm using my garden as an example because, as you can see up here, my pumpkin crop this year was not so hot. Something happened to our squash plants. And I know what it was. It was an insect called a squash boring beetle. And they're really hard to control. And we noticed about halfway through the summer that some of our plants, our squash plants, started looking yellowish instead of green. And some of the leaves were starting to shrivel up. And our pumpkin plants were the first to go, unfortunately. So we had these little pumpkins growing, and they only made it to about this big, which is not really ideal for a pumpkin, unfortunately, because these are really, these are called winter, I can't remember the name of the pumpkin, but it's a variety that makes a really good pie. It's a great pie pumpkin. It's winter something. Anyway, I highly recommend it. So our pumpkins didn't do so hot. We had delicata squash as well. That's these down here. And this is an almost full-grown delicata squash. So you can see it's a little small at the end, and these are some undergrown delicata squashes. And a lot of them were smaller than they should have been because the plants died. They started to die about halfway through the summer, and these really should keep growing throughout the summer. And they're one of my favorite squashes. I'm not really a huge squash fan, but delicatas, they are so tasty when they're cooked right. Anyway, so I want to find out what it was that made my squash plants so susceptible to squash boring beetles. It could be this is a raised bed where we had those squash plants and that were so susceptible to the beetles. It could be that I planted too many squash plants in here. We had pumpkins on this side, we had zucchini on the other side, and the delicatas growing on the edge of this thing here that we call the squunnel. That's because it's a squash tunnel and the plants grow up the side. The plants are all dead now, by the way, especially dead because we've had a couple frosts, and the frost kills squash plants pretty quickly. And our zucchini plant on the other side did really well. It produced a whole bunch of zucchinis and some really big ones. And our delicatas did okay, but they died a little early, so most of our delicatas are a little bit immature. So I'm hoping that we salvaged a few and that they're going to taste okay. Our pumpkins bit it way too soon. So could it be that I had too many squash plants in this raised bed? There's another raised bed over here, and this one could have also been crowded because we had the delicatas growing over here, and then on this side we had broccoli, and the broccoli did fairly well. But the delicatas, the same thing eventually happened. It started over here on this side, and then it made its way to the other side. The beetles got over there. And we had a really hard time controlling them. We saw them, we knew they were impacting the plants, and we couldn't get the beetles off of them in time. So, here's my question for you. Can I design an experiment next summer to determine if indeed my plants were too close together and made it too hard for me to control the squash boring beetles? Can I design an experiment with a control, you'll learn what that is this week, a dependent variable, an independent variable, and constants that could help me learn for certain or be more certain that I maybe planted these too close together, or maybe it was something else that made my plants so susceptible to squash boring bugs. Maybe it was just a really bad year for those beetles in my garden, or maybe there was another factor. So what I'd like you to do is to help me design an experiment next year to learn more about these beetles and how they impact my plants.